My name is Wendy Thomas. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a registered nurse. Let her go. We're not paying for the surgery. That's what my father told the doctor while I was lying in a hospital bed, unconscious, with machines helping keep me stable, and my heartbeat barely holding on. He said it as casually as someone canceling a monthly subscription. No pause, no shaky voice, no sign that the person in that bed was his daughter. At 11:18 on a Tuesday night, he signed the medical order that told the hospital not to bring me back if things took a turn. Not because the doctors said there was no hope, not because they told him I couldn't recover. He signed it after the billing department gave him the total. That was all it took. One number. And when I finally opened my eyes 3 weeks later, weak, bruised, and barely able to lift my head, I found out that the order he signed wasn't even the worst thing he had done while I was unconscious. What I did during the next 24 hours didn't just change my life. It brought his entire world crashing down, and he never saw it coming, because he forgot one very important thing about me. Before I continue, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly pulls you in. Now let me take you back 7 months earlier, to the day my grandmother passed away and everything began to fall apart. I was born with a hole in my heart. The doctors called it a ventricular septal defect. I was 4 years old when they performed the surgery. It lasted 11 hours. The medical bill, however, stayed in my family much longer than that. My mother eventually let it fade into the past. My father never did. Do you know how much you cost this family, Wendy? I was 8 the first time he said that to me. I had only asked for a new pair of sneakers. Mine had split along the sole, and whenever it rained, my socks would get soaked. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of old medical bills spread out in front of him. He didn't even look up. $214,000. That's what you cost us. I never got the sneakers. By the time I turned 12, I had stopped asking for things altogether. By 15, I was babysitting for 3 families on our block so I could buy my own school supplies. At 18, I signed my student loan papers by myself. Meanwhile, my older sister Meredith packed her bags for the state university, fully paid for by our parents. No one questioned it. Meredith got a car when she turned 16. I took the bus. Meredith had her tuition covered. I got a repayment schedule. Meredith had birthday dinners at restaurants. I got a boxed cake and a card with only my mother's name written inside, and I accepted it. That is the hardest part to explain. I wasn't angry back then. I truly believed I owed them. My father had said it so many times, you cost this family everything, that the guilt felt as real as the scar on my chest. I carried it with me every day, the same way I carried my nurse's badge. Quietly, automatically, without questioning it. The only person who never made me feel like a burden was my grandmother, Lillian. Lillian Price lived alone in a small brick house on Elm Street in Norristown, Pennsylvania. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a porch swing that creaked whenever the wind picked up. She had lived in that house for 41 years. She raised my mother there. She said goodbye to my grandfather there, and somehow she kept her garden alive through every winter. I started visiting her every Saturday when I was 23, fresh out of nursing school and buried under student loans. I would drive 40 minutes each way, bring groceries, check her blood pressure, sit beside her on that old porch swing, and listen while she talked about everything and nothing. She never once said, "You owe me." She said things like, "Tell me about your week, sweetheart," and "Did you eat today?" Then once, near the end, with her hands trembling and her voice barely above a whisper, she said something I didn't understand. "I've taken care of things for you, Wendy. When the time comes, a man named Kessler will find you." I smiled and squeezed her hand. I thought she was confused. Sometimes she seemed that way, or at least that's what I told myself. She was 84, and I assumed the medication was making her say things that didn't quite connect. My father hated that I visited her. "You're wasting gas," he would say. "She doesn't even remember your name." That was a lie. Lillian was clear-minded until the very end. She remembered everything, including the things my father wanted buried in the past. She passed away on a Thursday in March, peacefully in her sleep, inside that same brick house on Elm Street. My father arranged the funeral. Small, fast, controlled. He wouldn't let me read a eulogy. "Keep it short," he said at the funeral home entrance. "We're not turning this into a scene." So I stood in the back row and said goodbye without making a sound. Lillian had told me that Kessler would find me. I had no idea who Kessler was, not yet. It would take me falling unconscious, my father signing that hospital order, and 4 long days in a hospital bed before that name would finally mean anything. 3 months after Lillian's funeral, I was driving home from a 12-hour overnight shift at the hospital. It was 4:17 in the morning, Route 202, light rain tapping against the windshield, 6 hours if I skipped breakfast, 5 if I took a shower. That was the last time I ever made that kind of calculation. A pickup truck blew through the red light at nearly 50 miles an hour and slammed into the driver's side of my car. The impact crushed the frame inward like it was made of paper. I don't remember the noise. I don't remember the glass. I was later told I stayed conscious for about 90 seconds after the crash, just long enough for a paramedic to hear me say my name. Then everything went dark. There was swelling around my brain, 4 fractured ribs, and serious internal injuries. The emergency team at St. Catherine's, my own hospital, the same place where I clocked in 5 days a week, rushed me into surgery within the hour. But my condition kept getting worse. They needed a second operation, a specialist, more time in the operating room, and someone had to approve it. I had no husband, no children. The emergency contact listed in my hospital file was the same person who had been there since I was 18 because my father had insisted on it. Gerald Thomas, next of kin. They called him at 10:30 that night. He arrived at 10:47. I know the exact time because the front desk recorded it, but he didn't go to my room first. He didn't ask the nurse how I was doing. He didn't ask whether I was scared, whether I had opened my eyes, or whether I had said anything. He went straight to the billing department, and he asked one question. How much is this going to cost? I learned what happened next from Patricia Walsh. Everyone at St. Catherine's called her Pat. She was the head nurse with 28 years on the floor, a rough voice, and a memory sharp enough to catch every detail. Pat was standing at the nurse's station when my father came out of billing and found Dr. Richard Hale, the surgeon handling my case. She heard every word. "The second surgery," my father said. "What's the estimate?" Dr. Hale explained that it could range from $180,000 to $240,000, depending on complications. Insurance would cover part of it, but there would still be a major out-of-pocket cost, especially because my father was still connected to some of my older medical accounts. He had insisted on that when I turned 18. Back then, I thought he was helping me. Now I understand what it really was. A leash. My father didn't even flinch. "She doesn't have a healthcare proxy," he said. "I'm her father. I make the decision." Dr. Hale answered carefully. "That is the standard process when no proxy is on file. Next of kin steps in." And then my father said the words, "Let her go. We're not paying for the surgery." Pat told me later that Dr. Hale didn't answer right away. He just looked at my father for a long moment. My father didn't look away. "She's been a financial burden her whole life," he said. "Do not resuscitate." Then he signed the order. His hand was steady. No hesitation. He set the pen down, asked if there were any other papers he needed to sign, and walked toward the elevator. He never came to my room. He never looked through the glass. He never said goodbye. Pat stood behind the counter at the nurse's station, gripping the edge so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She told me she wanted to scream, but she didn't. She did something better. She sat down and opened my employee file. Every nurse at St. Catherine's fills out an emergency packet during onboarding, contact details, insurance, allergies, and a healthcare proxy section. Most people leave that last part blank. I didn't. 3 years before that night, I had named Deborah Owens as my healthcare proxy. Deborah was my best friend from nursing school. She lived 45 minutes away in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Her name was right there in my employee file. Full name, phone number, relationship. Pat found it in less than 2 minutes. She called Deborah at 11:14 p.m. Deborah answered on the second ring. Pat told her everything. The crash, my condition, the second surgery that needed approval, and the fact that my father had just signed an order to stop further intervention. Deborah didn't waste time asking unnecessary questions. She only said, "I'm leaving now." She drove 90 minutes through the rain. At 12:51 a.m., she walked into St. Catherine's with her driver's license, a copy of the proxy form she had kept in her filing cabinet, and hands that were still trembling. She canceled the order my father had signed. Then she approved the surgery. Dr. Hale scrubbed in within the hour. By then, my father was already back home. asleep. He had no idea his decision had been reversed. As far as he knew, the hospital would call him in the morning with the news he expected. But Pat didn't call him. Deborah didn't call him. No one did. Instead, before Pat's shift ended, she did one more thing. She opened an internal incident report, the kind staff file when they witness something that raises serious concerns about hospital procedure. She wrote down everything, my father's exact words, the timestamps, the medical order he had signed, and the fact that he had claimed I had no healthcare proxy, even though that was not true. Then she submitted the report, locked her computer, and sat alone in the break room for 20 minutes. Gerald Thomas went home that night believing that by morning there would be no difficult questions left to answer, and apparently he rested just fine. The next day, he made his second mistake, the one that would eventually cost him everything he owned. My father woke up that morning expecting a call from the hospital, an official update, maybe another form to sign, maybe a few words he could repeat to neighbors, church friends, and relatives. I could almost hear the speech he had prepared. A heavy sigh, a hand over his chest. We lost her. The injuries were just too severe. But the phone never rang. Not because anyone told him I had survived, it simply never rang. And instead of calling the hospital himself, instead of driving there to check on his youngest daughter, Gerald Thomas spent that Wednesday morning doing something else entirely. He went after my house. Here's what I didn't know at the time, what I would not find out until weeks later. Before my grandmother Lillian passed, she had already transferred the Norristown house into my name. Her personal attorney had handled everything. The deed was legal, properly filed with the county, and completely clean. And my father had no idea. What he did know was that Lillian was gone, the house was empty, and someone would eventually try to claim it. So he decided that someone was going to be him. He had a power of attorney document. My signature was on it. Except I had never signed it. He had copied my handwriting from old medical consent forms, the ones he made me sign when I had just turned 18 and didn't fully understand what I was putting my name on. Then he took that document to a notary he knew, a man named Carl, someone who owed him a favor and preferred not to ask questions. Carl stamped it. That same afternoon, Gerald filed a deed transfer at the county recorder's office. By Thursday, the house was under his name. By Friday, he had walked into a bank and borrowed against it $280,000, cash available within a week. None of that money went toward my medical care. None of it went into savings. It went toward private debts he had managed to keep hidden from our family, our church, and everyone in our neighborhood. He didn't know the house had already belonged to me. He didn't know how it had happened. And he definitely didn't know about the man my grandmother had mentioned, Kessler. But there is one thing about a copied signature. It only works as long as nobody studies it closely, and someone was about to study it very, very closely. I opened my eyes on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the crash. The light above me was that cold blue-white color only hospitals have. Too bright, too flat, no warmth at all. I knew that light. I had worked under it for 6 years, but I had never been the person lying beneath it before. My throat felt raw. The breathing tube was already gone, but I could still feel the memory of it, like a deep bruise I couldn't reach. My ribs hurt every time I took a breath. My left arm was wrapped in a soft cast. Everything felt heavy. Even blinking took effort. The first face I saw was Pat's. Not my father's, not my sister's. Pat's. She was standing near the window with her arms crossed, watching the monitors beside my bed. When she noticed my eyes were open, she didn't gasp. She didn't rush around the room. She simply pulled a chair closer, sat beside me, and took my hand. Her grip was steady and warm. "You're safe," she said. "There are things I need to tell you. Not right now, when you're ready." I tried to speak, but my voice came out cracked and thin. "How long?" 3 weeks, she said. "The surgery went well. You're going to recover." I closed my eyes again. Not because I was tired, because I was trying to remember how I had ended up there. The truck, the red light, the moment everything changed. Then the door opened. My father walked in at 2:17 that afternoon. The nurses logged it. I know that because I checked later. He paused in the doorway for just a second, and I watched his face, carefully. There was a flicker there, less than a second. Then his expression shifted into something softer, something rehearsed. I had spent years reading faces in the ICU. The fear of losing someone looks very different from the fear of being exposed. He hurried to my bedside and grabbed my hand. Tears rolled down his face. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice shaking. "We were so scared. Thank God you're okay." I looked at him, at the tears, at the trembling lip, at the performance. "Hi, Dad," I said. Meredith sent flowers that evening. A plain bouquet from an online florist. She didn't come. 2 days later, I was strong enough to sit up on my own. Pat waited until the afternoon shift change, when the hallway had gone quiet and my door could stay closed without anyone questioning it. She pulled the same chair over to my bed, but she didn't sit right away. For a moment, she just stood there looking at me like she was trying to choose the gentlest place to start. "Just say it, Pat." She sat down. "The night of your accident, your father came to the hospital." "I know," I whispered. "He told me he was here every day." "He wasn't." I didn't move. "He came once," she said. "That night. He spoke with Dr. Hale. He asked about the cost of your surgery." I kept my hands still on the blanket. "He told Dr. Hale you didn't have a healthcare proxy. He said he was the only person allowed to make decisions for you. Then he signed an order refusing emergency intervention." The room went silent. The monitor beside me kept beeping. I counted 3 beeps before I said anything. "He signed that?" "Yes." "For me?" "Yes." I swallowed, even though my throat hurt. "What did he say exactly?" Pat looked straight at me. "Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. She's been a financial drain her whole life." I closed my eyes, not because I was shocked, because for the first time someone had finally put words to what I had felt since I was a child. It was the shape of a truth I had always known but had never heard out loud. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I was a line on a bill, a number, a cost that never stopped following him. I opened my eyes again. "How am I still here?" "I found your proxy in your employee file," Pat said. "Deborah Owens. I called her. She drove here in the middle of the night and approved the surgery." "Is there a record of what he did?" "Yes," she said. "Incident report. Filed and time-stamped. His exact words included." I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I turned my head toward her. "Get me my phone." Pat reached into the drawer beside my bed and handed it to me. I powered it on. 32 missed calls from my father, 11 from Meredith. I scrolled past all of them. Then I opened my contacts and found a name I hadn't called in months, a name my grandmother had given me, Kessler. The phone rang twice. "This is Donald Kessler." His voice was calm and precise, the kind of voice that sounded like it had read 10,000 legal documents and had stopped being surprised by people a long time ago. "Mr. Kessler, my name is Wendy Thomas. I think my grandmother—" "Ms. Thomas," he said gently, cutting in. "I've been trying to reach you for 4 months." My hand tightened around the phone. Pain shot through my ribs, but I ignored it. Then he explained. 2 years before she passed, Lillian Price had gone to his office. She had sat across from his desk, clear-minded and sharp as ever, and told him she wanted to prepare a will. Not through the family attorney, not through anyone my father might know. Through him. Privately. Signed, notarized by his own staff, and sealed. The instructions were simple. The house on Elm Street in Norristown was to go to Wendy Marie Thomas, and only Wendy Marie Thomas. A trust account containing $85,000 was also to go to Wendy Marie Thomas, and only Wendy Marie Thomas. No shared ownership, no conditions, no exceptions. "It was probated 5 months ago," Kessler said. "The court confirmed it. The deed transfer into your name was filed and recorded. I sent certified letters to your address, but they were returned." I stared at the wall. "I called the phone number listed for you," he continued. "Someone told me you had moved out of state and didn't want to be contacted." My father. That had been my father on the phone, telling Kessler I was gone. "I'm in the hospital, Mr. Kessler," I said. "I was in a car accident. I've been unconscious for 3 weeks." There was a brief pause. "I'm very sorry to hear that, Miss Thomas." "The house," I asked. "Is it still in my name?" This pause was longer. "Let me pull the current deed records. I'll call you back within the hour." I ended the call and rested the phone against my chest. Pat was still standing near the door. Before we hung up, Kessler had said one more thing. Your grandmother told me you would call. She said, Wendy always comes through, just give her time. 1 hour. That was all it took for Donald Kessler to uncover what my father had done, and that was all it took for my plan to begin. The phone rang 53 minutes later. Kessler's voice sounded different this time, still controlled, still professional. But now there was an edge underneath it, the kind of quiet tension a man gets when he has just found something he did not expect. Ms. Thomas, he said, the deed to your grandmother's property was transferred out of your name 3 weeks ago. I stared at the IV line in my arm and counted the drops. 1, 2, 3. Transferred to whom? Gerald Thomas, he said. Your father. He used a power of attorney. My voice was calm when I answered. I never signed a power of attorney, Mr. Kessler. I know you didn't, Kessler said. I have the original deed transfer from probate. Your signature was notarized through my office. No power of attorney was ever authorized by you or recorded through my firm. So it was forged. That is my assessment, yes. Then his voice lowered slightly. And there's more. I ran a lien search on the property. A mortgage was recorded against it 6 days ago. How much? $280,000. That number seemed to fill the entire room. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could hear Kessler breathing quietly on the other end of the line, waiting for me to respond. He used the house as collateral, I said. Yes, Kessler replied. He did. I reached for the pen on my bedside table. My hand didn't shake. I don't know why. Maybe because none of it truly surprised me. Maybe because I had spent 29 years learning exactly who my father was, and this was simply the final lesson. I wrote down every detail Kessler gave me: the mortgage amount, the recording date, the lien holder, the notary's stamp number. Ms. Thomas, he said carefully, do you want to take legal action? Not yet, I said. First, I want to know how far this goes. There is one more thing, Kessler added. I stopped writing. Your grandmother left you a letter, sealed. She instructed me to deliver it to you in person, and only to you. I set the pen down. When can you come to the hospital? Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be here. I ended the call, wrote down the last number, and turned toward Pat. She had been standing silently by the window the entire time. Pat, I asked, what time did my father sign that order? 11:18 p.m. I wrote that down too. Gerald Thomas visited me the next afternoon with a bouquet of yellow roses and a container of banana bread Meredith had baked. He placed both on the table beside my bed, kissed my forehead, and lowered himself into the chair with the heavy sigh of a man carrying a weight no one else could understand. He was good at that. The performance. I had watched him do it my entire life, at parent-teacher conferences, at church gatherings, at holiday dinners. The tired father, the quiet provider, the man who gave everything and never asked for sympathy. The doctors say you may be out in a week, he said, squeezing my hand. We'll take care of everything. Thank you, Dad. This time Meredith came with him. It was her first visit since the accident. She stood at the foot of my bed, phone in hand, wearing a tight smile that never reached her eyes. We were so worried, she said. I couldn't sleep for weeks. I looked at her. She looked toward the window. My father leaned closer, lowering his voice into that soft, comforting tone he used when he wanted someone to feel protected. Don't worry about the medical bills, sweetheart. We'll figure it out as a family. That's what families do. That's what families do. The man who had signed away my chance was sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand and speaking to me about family. As a family, I repeated. I squeezed his hand back. Then I smiled. He smiled too. Satisfied. He thought the script was working. They stayed for 40 minutes. Gerald talked about the weather, the Phillies, and a plumbing leak he had fixed for a client on Saturday. Meredith checked her phone 11 times. Then they left. I watched the door close behind them. For 10 seconds, I didn't move. The room was completely still. Then I picked up my phone and called Kessler. Mr. Kessler, I said, bring the letter. Donald Kessler arrived at exactly 9 the next morning. He was shorter than I had imagined. A quiet man in a gray suit, with silver-rimmed glasses and a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had been through decades of difficult conversations. He shook my hand gently, careful not to disturb the IV line, then pulled a chair beside my bed. "Your grandmother spoke about you often," he said. "Every time we met, she mentioned you." He opened the briefcase. Inside was a manila envelope, sealed shut. On the front, in Lillian's handwriting, was only one word: Wendy. I broke the seal carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. Her handwriting was thin, but steady. She had written it while she could still hold a pen. "Wendy, I know your father will try to take everything. He already has over the years. My pension, my savings, things I never told you, because I thought keeping quiet would keep the family together. That was my mistake. Do not make it yours. The house is yours. The money is yours. Mr. Kessler has all the paperwork. Don't let anyone take what belongs to you, not even your father, especially your father. You are stronger than I was, sweetheart. You always have been. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that while I could still hold your hand. And then I broke. For the first time since waking up, since the accident, since Pat told me what had happened, since every terrible truth had landed on top of the last like bricks in my chest, I cried. Not because I was weak, because my grandmother had seen me, really seen me, every part of me, and she had prepared for this moment the same way she had done everything else in her life. Quietly, carefully, with a kind of love that never needed an audience. Kessler waited without saying a word. When I was ready, he placed a thick folder on the blanket beside me. Inside were the original will, the probate records, the deed showing the house had been transferred into my name, and the lien search showing the mortgage my father had taken out against it. "You have what you need," Kessler said. "What would you like to do?" I wiped my face and forced myself to sit a little straighter. My ribs protested immediately. I ignored it. "I want to do this the right way," I said. "I want it done openly, and I want it done before Sunday." Kessler raised one eyebrow. "What happens on Sunday?" "Our church has its monthly community gathering," I said. "My father is a deacon. He never misses it." "Okay, I need to stop here for just a second. If you're watching this and thinking, I know exactly what that kind of betrayal feels like, or if you're sitting there wondering, what is she going to do on Sunday? Leave a comment right now. Tell me honestly. Would you confront him in front of everyone, or would you handle it quietly behind closed doors? I really want to know what you would do. Now, back to the story. 5 days after I woke up, the hospital released me. I was still sore, still slow, still bruised in places I couldn't even see. But I could walk, I could think clearly, and most importantly, I could make my own decisions. That was enough. My father arrived at 10 that morning to pick me up. He brought a suitcase. "You're staying with us until you recover," he said. He didn't ask. He announced it. That was how Gerald Thomas did everything. No arguments. "That's kind of you, Dad," I said. "But Deborah is picking me up. She has a spare room." His face shifted. Not much. Gerald Thomas never let the mask fall completely, but the corners of his mouth tightened. "You'd rather stay with someone else than with your own family?" "She's not someone else," I said. "She's been my emergency contact for 3 years." Something moved behind his eyes. A calculation, but he didn't connect the dots. Not yet. "Fine," he said. Then he picked up the suitcase he had brought and walked out without saying goodbye. That evening, Meredith texted me. "Dad is upset. You're being ungrateful after everything he's been through." I read the message. Then I set my phone down. I didn't answer. At Deborah's apartment, I sat at her kitchen table and called Kessler. We went over the timeline again. He confirmed every step. The court filing to challenge the deed transfer, the report about the copied signature, the notice to the mortgage lender that the property title was being disputed. Everything was ready. Everything was documented. "Sunday," I said. "Sunday," he agreed. That night my father called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I needed to hear his voice. I needed to know exactly what he would say when he thought I still knew nothing. "By the way," he said casually, like he had practiced the line in advance, "Grandma Lillian's house. I've been handling the estate details. Don't worry about any of that right now. I'll explain when you're feeling better." He was testing me. checking the edges, trying to see if I knew anything. "Okay, Dad," I said. "Thanks for taking care of it." I hung up and placed the phone face down on the table. Deborah stood in the kitchen doorway, watching me. "How do you do that?" she asked. "How do you sound so calm?" I looked down at the phone. "Practice," I said. 29 years of practice. "Let me tell you about my father's church. First Grace Community Church sits on a tree-lined road in a suburb west of Philadelphia. White steeple, red brick, a parking lot that fills up every Sunday by 9:45. Around 120 people attend each week. Families, retirees, small business owners, teachers, the kind of congregation where everyone knows your name, your children's names, and what dish you brought to the last potluck." Gerald Thomas had been a deacon there for 15 years. He greeted people at the door, he read scripture from the lectern, he organized the men's breakfast. After every service, he shook hands with nearly everyone in the room, looked them in the eye, and asked about their families. When the church needed a new roof, Gerald led the fundraising campaign. When someone's furnace broke in the middle of January, Gerald fixed it for free and refused to take $1. Pastor David mentioned him in sermons, a man of faith and sacrifice. That was the phrase. I had heard it so many times I could almost feel it grinding against my teeth. Every first Sunday of the month, the church held a community potluck in the fellowship hall, folding tables, casserole dishes, paper plates, and a standing microphone near the front where people shared blessings, updates, and prayer requests. Gerald always spoke. He always talked about gratitude, about family, about what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. 120 people believed every word, and that Sunday was the first Sunday of the month. I called Kessler on Saturday evening. "Can you be there at noon?" I asked. "I'll be there at 11:30, Kessler said. I ended the call and sat back on Deborah's couch. My ribs still hurt when I breathed too deeply. The marks on my forearms had faded from dark purple to yellow. I could walk without flinching now, slowly, but on my own. I wasn't planning to create a scene. I was planning to have a conversation, but when 120 people are sitting in the room, even a conversation can become a stage. Sunday morning, 7 a.m. I woke up before the alarm. I stood in front of Deborah's bathroom mirror and looked at myself. The mark along my jaw was almost gone. The one beneath my left eye had faded into a pale green shadow. My collarbone still ached whenever I lifted my arm too high. I looked like someone who had survived a crash. Because I had. I put on a white button-down shirt and black slacks. Simple, clean, no jewelry except for the small silver studs Lillian had given me on my 21st birthday. I pulled my hair back, washed my face, and didn't bother with makeup. Then I picked up the manila folder from the kitchen table. Inside were copies of Lillian's will, the deed showing the house in my name, the county records showing the mortgage my father had taken out, and the redacted hospital report Pat had given me, the one with my father's words printed in black ink on official letterhead. I placed the folder in my bag. Deborah drove. Neither of us said much. At 11:20, she turned onto the church road and parked near the back of the lot. The steeple caught the morning sunlight. She looked over at me. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure." She squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens in there, I'll be right outside." I nodded and opened the car door. Kessler was already there. I spotted him near the entrance, standing by the flagpole in his gray suit with his worn leather briefcase in one hand. He had the calm patience of a man who knew exactly why he had come. When he saw me, he gave one small nod. I walked through the front doors. The service had already started. Hymns filled the room. The air was warm. The place smelled like old carpet, coffee, and Sunday morning. I slipped into the last pew and sat down. My father was in the front row. He turned when the door opened and saw me. His face brightened immediately. The proud father, the thankful deacon, the man everyone believed had carried a terrible burden with grace. He lifted his hand and waved. I gave him a small wave back, calm, patient. Meredith sat beside him. She glanced at me once. She didn't wave. The service ended at noon. The congregation moved into the fellowship hall, a wide, low-ceilinged room with fluorescent lights and rows of folding tables. Foil trays of baked ziti and green bean casserole lined the serving table. Paper plates sat beside a tall stack of napkins. Near the front stood the microphone, plugged into a small speaker that buzzed softly. Gerald was already beside it. Of course he was. He stood with his hands folded in front of him, waiting for the room to settle. 120 people found their seats. Chairs scraped against the linoleum. Children hurried between tables. Then my father tapped the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began. "I'd like to start with something personal today." The room grew quiet. As many of you know, my youngest daughter, Wendy, was in a serious car accident last month. She was unconscious for 3 weeks. The doctors weren't sure how things would turn out. He paused. He was always good at pauses. "But God is faithful," he continued, "and today, Wendy is here with us." He turned and gestured toward me. I was standing near the back wall. Every head in the room turned. Then came the applause. Warm, genuine. A woman in the second row placed a hand over her heart. An older man nodded at me with kind eyes. "As a father," Gerald said, letting his voice tremble at just the right moment, "there is nothing more frightening than almost losing your child. I prayed every single night. I never left her side." The words settled in my chest, not like pain, like a key turning in a lock. I never left her side. He said that in front of 120 people who had no reason to doubt him. "Family is everything," he said. "That's what I've always taught my girls." Then he looked at me. He smiled, and he opened his arms just a little, the silent gesture of a father expecting his daughter to walk into them. I smiled back. Then I walked toward him. The whole room watched with soft, hopeful eyes. "Dad," I said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear, "can I say a few words?" He didn't hesitate. He couldn't, not after telling everyone I was his miracle. "Of course, sweetheart." He handed me the microphone. His smile was wide, confident. He stepped aside with his hands behind his back, playing the supportive father perfectly. I wrapped my fingers around the microphone. It was still warm from his hand. I didn't look at him. I looked at the room. "Thank you all for your prayers," I said. "I'm truly grateful to be standing here. But I need to correct something my father just said." The room went completely still. Beside me, Gerald's smile faded just enough for me to see it. My father was not sitting beside my hospital bed praying for me. He came to the hospital one time, the night of the accident, and he didn't come to my room first. He went to the billing department. I could feel him shift beside me. I didn't look at him. After that, he spoke with my surgeon. He asked how much the second surgery would cost, and when he heard the number, he said something that was later documented in an official hospital report. I paused, then said the words clearly. "Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. She's been a financial drain her whole life." The silence changed. It became heavy, sharp, the kind of silence that makes every breath in the room feel too loud. Then he signed an order refusing further emergency intervention. Someone near the middle of the hall gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. I am standing here because a nurse at the hospital found my healthcare proxy and my employee file. She called my friend in the middle of the night. That friend drove 90 minutes through rain to approve the surgery. I finally turned my head slightly. Not my father, not my sister, my friend. Gerald stepped toward me. "Wendy, stop. You don't know what you're—" "I'm not finished, Dad. This isn't the place." "You chose this room to tell a story that wasn't true," I said. "I'm choosing the same room to tell what actually happened." His voice tightened. "You're confused. The medication—" "I have the hospital records right here." No one moved. No one reached for a cup. No one checked a phone. 120 people sat frozen, waiting for what came next. Gerald stopped talking. Then the side door of the fellowship hall opened. Donald Kessler walked in. Gray suit, leather briefcase. No hurry at all. He didn't search the room for a seat. He walked straight to the front, placed his briefcase on the nearest folding table, and stood beside me with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent his life dealing in documents that could not be talked away. My father saw him, and for the first time in my life, I watched Gerald Thomas look truly afraid. Not offended, not angry, afraid. "This is Mr. Donald Kessler," I said into the microphone. He was my grandmother Lillian's attorney. A low murmur moved through the room. Lillian's name still meant something there. She had attended that church for 30 years. My grandmother left me her house and her savings in a will that was notarized and confirmed by the court 5 months ago. I let the words settle. My father didn't know about it because my grandmother didn't trust him with it. Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it. While I was unconscious, I continued, my father used a power of attorney with my signature on it, a signature I did not give. He transferred the house into his name and took out a $280,000 mortgage against it. A gasp moved through the hall. Somewhere near the back, a dish slipped and hit the floor. A fork clattered against the linoleum. Gerald's voice came out louder this time, strained. That's a lie. Lillian left that house to the family, not just you. Kessler opened his briefcase. He lifted one document from inside, the original will, and held it where the people in the front rows could see the notary seal. I have the original will here, Mr. Thomas, he said evenly. The property was left solely to Wendy Marie Thomas. Your name does not appear in this document. Gerald looked at Meredith. Meredith stared at the floor. I lowered the microphone for a moment and spoke directly to him, not whispering, not shouting, just speaking. I'm not here to embarrass you, Dad. I'm here because you tried to make a decision that would have ended my chance to recover, and when that didn't work, you took what belonged to me. I know this is a lot. If this story is hitting close to home, you're not alone. So many people have lived through moments where family showed them exactly who they were. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends, and tell me in the comments, what would you have said to Gerald in that room, with everyone watching? Now, let's keep going. Gerald turned toward the congregation. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved across the room, searching for someone, anyone, who might still stand with him. She's on strong medication, he said. She doesn't understand what she's saying. This is a private family matter. No one answered. The room had become a wall of folded arms, still faces, and unblinking eyes. Then a man from the back spoke up. I didn't recognize him. If it's just a private family matter, Gerald, why is there an attorney standing next to her? Gerald had no answer. His eyes moved to Pastor David, who stood near the coffee table with his hands in his pockets. Gerald, the pastor said quietly, I think we should let her finish. Gerald shifted again, and just like that, he changed tactics, the way he always did when control started slipping. His shoulders dropped, his voice softened, he let it break in just the right place. I have sacrificed everything for this family, he said. Wendy's medical bills nearly ruined us when she was a child. I did what I thought was best. I didn't lift the microphone. I just spoke clearly from where I stood, the way I had spoken to patients who were trying to avoid a hard truth. You did what cost you the least, Dad. That is not the same thing. His face tightened. You have no idea the pressure I've been under. The debts, He stopped, because he realized what he had almost said. His mouth shut like a door. Meredith stood up from her chair. Her face had gone pale. Dad, she said, barely above a whisper, stop talking. Gerald grabbed her arm. Tell them, Meredith. Tell them I was trying to protect the family. Meredith pulled her arm free. She looked at me, then at the floor, then at the exit. I can't do this, she said, and she walked toward the door. As she passed close enough for only me to hear, she whispered 6 words I will never forget. I should have called Deborah myself. Then she was gone. I watched the door close behind my sister. The entire room was still looking at me. I turned back to the congregation. I'm not sharing this to ruin my father, I said. I'm sharing it because for 15 years he has stood at this microphone and told you who he is. I think you deserve to know the full truth. Then I turned to Gerald. He was almost backed against the wall now. His hands hung at his sides. The confident deacon who had opened the gathering was gone. Standing there instead was a man who looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Dad, here is what happens next. My voice stayed calm. I didn't even need the microphone anymore. The room was quiet enough to hear a page turn. Mr. Kessler filed a motion with the county court yesterday to cancel the deed transfer. It was based on a power of attorney I never signed. Gerald's jaw tightened. The bank that issued the mortgage has been notified that the title is being challenged. The loan is frozen. His left hand began to tremble. I filed a formal report on Friday about the false signature and the financial deception. The notary who stamped the document is named in it too. He took half a step back. You will be required to return the full $280,000. If you don't, this moves forward legally. Gerald's voice came out rough, almost a whisper. You would really do that to your own father? I looked straight at him. No hesitation, no flinch. You signed a paper that would have taken away your own daughter's chance to recover. The fellowship hall seemed to stop breathing. Somewhere near the back, a child asked a question, and their mother quickly hushed them. I'm not doing anything to you, Dad, I said. I'm giving you a chance to make it right. That is more than you gave me. Kessler closed his briefcase with a soft click. The filings are already with the court, Mr. Thomas, he said. This is not a negotiation. Gerald looked around the room one last time. I watched him do it, face by face, slowly. These were people who had known him for years. Jim Callahan, whose pipes he fixed every winter. Susan Merritt, who brought him coffee after almost every service. Robert Dill, the other deacon, who had stood beside him through every fundraiser for a decade. They all looked back at him. No one turned away, and no one stepped toward him. Gerald sat down, not in a chair, on the edge of the nearest folding table. Then he lowered his face into his hands. Robert walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, not gentle. Gerald, he said, I think you should leave. Gerald stood. He walked toward the door. His shoes barely made a sound on the linoleum. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at me. His eyes were red. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something. One final line, one final speech, something that would land the way his words always had before, but nothing came out. Then he left. I set the microphone down on the nearest table. My hands were steady. My ribs hurt. I didn't care. I'm sorry for interrupting your Sunday, I said to the room. My grandmother Lillian loved this church. I believe she would have wanted the truth spoken here. 2 women came forward and hugged me. A man I didn't know shook my hand without saying a word. Pat had arrived quietly before the service and had been standing near the coffee station the whole time. From across the room, she caught my eye. Then she gave me one firm nod. A moment later, someone touched my arm, a small, weathered hand. I turned. An older woman stood beside me with white hair, a cardigan, and glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. I'm Doris Brennan, she said. Your grandmother and I sat together every Sunday for 20 years. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. She talked about you every single week, Doris said. She was so proud of you, Wendy. She never stopped telling people about you. I had spent my whole life believing I was invisible in my father's world, that no one there had ever really seen me, but Lillian had made sure that wasn't true. Within 24 hours, everything Gerald Thomas had built began to fall apart. The bank froze the mortgage on Monday morning. Before noon, an attorney from the lender's risk department called Kessler. The title was flagged as disputed. The loan was suspended. Gerald could not access the funds. He could not refinance. He could not sell the property. The $280,000 he had already spent was gone, and now the obligation was his alone, with nothing solid underneath it. The county court accepted Kessler's motion to reverse the deed transfer. Gerald was served at his home that same afternoon. A process server knocked on his door at 3:15. His neighbor happened to be outside getting the mail and saw the entire thing. An official investigation was opened into the documents and the money trail. The notary, Carl, was named in the report. By Tuesday, Carl had hired his own attorney and was cooperating. Gerald was standing alone. Word moved through the church faster than any sermon ever could. By Tuesday evening, Gerald was asked to step down as deacon after a unanimous board vote. Robert Dill called him personally. Gerald didn't argue. He didn't even come to the meeting. Then his plumbing clients started canceling. 3 on Monday, 5 more by Wednesday. Most of them were church members. One of them, Jim Callahan, sent him a single text. "Don't come to my house again." Gerald called me at 10 that night. I answered. "You destroyed me," he said. His voice sounded empty, flat. "No, Dad," I said. "You did that yourself. I just stopped protecting the version of you everyone believed in." He hung up. Then he called Meredith. She didn't answer. And then one more thing surfaced that week. Kessler found it during a routine review of my records. 3 years earlier, Gerald had changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy from Deborah to himself. My signature was on the form, but I had never signed it. He had prepared for every possible version of my absence, and none of those plans included saving me. Meredith called 3 days later. I was sitting on Deborah's couch with a heating pad across my ribs and a cup of tea going cold on the table. My phone buzzed. Her name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for 2 full rings before I picked up. Wendy. Her voice was thick. She had been crying. I need to say something. Then say it. I knew about the order, she said. I was in the waiting room when Dad went to speak with the doctor. He told me what he was going to do. She paused. I didn't stop him. I said nothing. I let the silence do what silence does. And the house. I knew about that too, Meredith said. He promised me $85,000 if I stayed quiet. And you stayed quiet? Yes. While I was unconscious in the hospital? Yes. Her voice broke. I was afraid of him, Wendy. I've always been afraid of him. I know that doesn't excuse it. No, I said. It doesn't. She started crying then. Hard. Messy. The way she used to cry when we were kids. Loud and helpless and impossible to ignore. I remembered that sound. Back then, it always made me want to fix everything for her. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I know I don't deserve that. You're right, I said. Not right now. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing through the phone, uneven and thin. But I'm not going to pretend you don't exist, Meredith. If you want to rebuild something with me, without Dad's money, without his lies, you know where to find me. She didn't answer for a while. Then she said quietly, Grandma Lillian sent me a letter too. I sat up straighter. She wrote, I love you, Meredith, but you are too much like your father. Choose differently. The line went still. Did you? I asked. Choose differently? She didn't answer, because we both already knew. Forgiveness is not something I owe anyone, but the door is not locked. It is only closed. If Meredith wants to come back into my life, she will have to knock. 1 month later, Lillian's house was legally back in my name. The court reversed the transfer on a Wednesday. Kessler called me at 10 in the morning with the decision. I thanked him. He said, Thank your grandmother. Then he paused and added, She would have loved seeing you stand up for yourself in that fellowship hall. Gerald faced serious legal consequences for the forged documents, the property transfer, and the mortgage. His attorney advised him to accept a deal. Probation, full repayment, no time behind bars as long as he cooperated. Gerald accepted. He didn't have many options. The evidence was too strong, and Carl, the notary, had already told investigators everything. Gerald sold his house to cover part of what he owed. It still wasn't enough. The remaining balance would follow him for years. He moved in with his brother in Allentown. I heard that from Meredith, who heard it from a cousin. I never checked. I didn't need to. Meredith lost 2 real estate clients from the church. She didn't lose her license. She wasn't charged with anything because she hadn't signed the documents. But people remembered. People always remember. Eventually, I went back to work. Part-time at first. Pat adjusted the schedule so I would only take day shifts for the first 2 months. She didn't turn it into a grand gesture. She simply handed me the new rotation and said, Welcome back, Thomas. On a Saturday in late October, I drove to Norristown. I parked on Elm Street. Then I walked up to the little brick house with the creaking porch swing and the garden that had grown a little wild. I put the key into the front door. My key. My door. And I stepped inside. The first thing I smelled was lavender. Lillian's lavender sachets were still tucked into drawers and closets throughout the house. The scent of a woman who had quietly prepared for everything. Her photo was on the mantel. It was the 2 of us sitting on the porch swing, squinting into the sun. I don't remember who took it. I sat down in her rocking chair. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check my phone. I just sat there. For the first time in my life, I was inside a home that truly belonged to me, not because I had earned someone's approval, not because I had paid for love with silence, but because someone had loved me enough to make sure I would be okay. For years, I believed being a good daughter meant accepting whatever my family gave me. Every cruel comment, every guilt trip, every reminder of what I had supposedly cost them. I absorbed all of it and said thank you, because I thought that was what love required. silence, gratitude, obedience. I was wrong. A boundary is not revenge. A boundary is protection. And sometimes protecting yourself looks like a quiet attorney in a gray suit, a stack of notarized papers, and the courage to stand in front of 120 people and say, "This is what really happened." I don't hate my father. Hating him would mean he still gets to control something inside me. He doesn't. Not anymore. He is a man who made terrible choices because of debts he was too proud to admit and habits he was too ashamed to face. That does not excuse what he did, but it does explain why I no longer have to carry the weight he placed on my shoulders. If you are watching this and you see yourself anywhere in my story, in the guilt, in the silence, in that deep belief that you owe everything to people who have hurt you, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't. You do not owe anyone your health. You do not owe anyone your home. And you do not owe anyone the rest of your life. My grandmother Lillian taught me that, not with lectures, not with shouting, but with a letter, a house, and a lawyer named Kessler. And yes, I still go to church, a different church, same faith, smaller congregation, better coffee. And now I sit in the front row, not because I need everyone to see me, but because I am done hiding in the back. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If Wendy's story connected with you or reminded you of someone you care about, leave a comment below. Tell me, what boundary did you set that changed your life? I would truly love to read your story. And if you want more stories like this one, check the description. There is another one waiting for you that I think you will connect with even more. Subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.